Good evening to St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. I'm Earl Buski, welcoming you to today's or this evening's edition of the 10th National Reparations Lecture, sponsored by the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee in association with the Caribbean Reparations Commission and all of our attendant entities allied in St. Lucia. We welcome you to this evening's discussion, which is going to concentrate on the topic of John Quinlan, a St. Lucian who made a great contribution in the 19th century to national and regional liberation. And for tonight's session, we have ensured that we can present one which looks at, as usual, who we are, where we are from, and what we are after. And tonight's discussion takes place against the background of our continuing effort to ensure that St. Lucians and Caribbean people are up to date with what the Caribbean community, the CARICOM heads of government, are pursuing on behalf of the region in terms of reparations for slavery and a native genocide. And before we go into this evening's session, as is normal in such instances, we want to bring you up to date with what has been happening since our last session and how we intend to ensure that what we present to you this evening is in keeping with what is expected of us. And as always, we bring you up to date with what has happened since our last session. And I think the biggest activity having to do with reparations has had to do with the situation in Namibia, where the government of Germany announced reparations for Namibia that came across as sounding very good, but within days was amended from the standpoint that the persons in Namibia for whom those reparations were aimed and intended were not consulted, did not participate in the discussions leading to the final conclusion. And at the end of the day, neither the government of Namibia nor the descendants of the affected communities are satisfied. And it has given us in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Asia, in all of the countries that were former, that are former colonies and have to consider making appeals for reparatory justice, to be able to see and to understand is that it is not just a claim that is made based on historicity or based on how we feel about our past, but it is something which Sir Arthur Lewis, whose 30th anniversary of his death we observed 2 days ago on the 15th of June, it allows us to appreciate that him as a St. Lucian, as a Caribbean citizen, as a product of the then British West Indies, was able, as far back in 1939, 82 years ago, to have penned that seminal work called Labor in the West Indies, his first work published in 1939, following his having taken a year off his duties in the university lecture series in the United Kingdom, to take 1 year to travel in 1938 to every island and territory from Guyana in the south all the way up to Jamaica in the north, and to meticulously document what was happening in these islands and territories during that period, to come up with what today we could look back on as the virtual blueprint for reparations, the document that outlines, an 82-year-old document that is still alive today, and that outlines how we should approach the issue of reparatory justice, which document, 81 years after Sir Arthur Lewis put it together, was adopted by the Caribbean community, CARICOM, in 2020 as the prime document that is going to guide how the Caribbean community not only requests reparatory justice, but the basis on which that reparatory justice, from an economic standpoint, will be distributed. Also, in the period since then, we have got from the United States the declaration that June the 19th, this coming Saturday, Juneteenth as it is called, the anniversary of the abolition of slavery in the United States, will finally officially be recognized as a national holiday for the first time as of this coming Saturday. And that was announced by Vice President Kamala Harris in a letter earlier this month to the chair of the CARICOM community, Dr. Keith Rowley of Trinidad and Tobago, confirming that the United States has agreed to make June 19th, a national holiday, but also that the United States today, under President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, have also adopted June as a month of recognition of Caribbean American ties, to recognize the contribution of Caribbean people in the United States, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, for them to be observed through an entire week, an entire month in June. And all of these activities, folks, while they may seem disconnected with the Caribbean, are connected with the fact that in 2013, the Caribbean community established the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which was able to influence the existence of an American National Reparations Commission, and which was able to also influence the establishment in Europe of reparations commissions across all of those European countries that formerly owned Caribbean or West Indian colonies. And the nationals of those countries who are in Europe, whether from the Windrush generation or since then, everywhere they have never forgotten their roots. They are Caribbean people living in Europe and keeping the red, green, and gold flag of Caribbean and African liberation alive and well in Europe. And the establishment of the Center for Reparations Research in Jamaica 2 years ago established the possibility for ensuring that the reparations struggle is not only one that is Caribbean, but that it is a tricontinental affair that unites Africa, the Americas, Latin America, North America, South America, and the Caribbean, counted as the Americas, and Europe. So that is the tricontinental link. Africa, the Americas, including the Caribbean, and Europe. And on that basis, long before George Floyd was killed a year ago, the Caribbean had decided through the Center for Reparations Research and the CARICOM Reparations Commission to ensure that we can link our struggles in St. Lucia, the Caribbean, Latin America, South America, link those struggles to the African continent and to Europe to ensure that the issue of reparations is a tricontinental one. And the George Floyd incident gave a fillip to the national reparations movement in the United States, which up until then was simply boiled down to the H.R. 40 bill represented or presented by John Lewis, Representative John Lewis from 1980. He died before reparations came to America, but he died knowing that it was on the way because the Caribbean reparations movement had given that fillip to the American reparations movement to ensure that Black Lives Matter, not only in America, but across the world. And the influence of the George Floyd murder on the development and promotion of the reparations movement in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Europe, and around the world has redounded to the fact that tonight we observe our 10th National Reparations Lecture from the series launched in August of 2021. And it is our pleasure tonight to present a topic around John Quinlan and his quest for reparations for St. Lucian ex-slaves. Because John Quinlan, who predated Marcus Garvey and who engaged in anti-colonial activities in St. Lucia and in Britain as well, was able to put St. Lucia on the map by virtue of what we will be able to hear from our distinguished presenter tonight, Mr. Lawrence Poyot, who has done quite a lot of research on John Quinlan. And in that regard, I'm sorry about that, but in that regard, we welcome all of you listening this evening, and we encourage you to take in our discussions this evening. This evening, like I said, we have Mr. Lawrence Poyot, our presenter. We also have in the house this evening Dr. Keith Nurse, the principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community college named after Sir Arthur, who, like I said, um, the 30th anniversary of his death was observed earlier this week. And to start off this evening, we will ask Dr. Nurse to join us and give us a fair representation of how the school, the institution, the educational entity, the college named after Sir Arthur observed his 30th anniversary. And of course, we do know that there was a very interesting activity called an unthought activity, which was really aimed at encouraging and accelerating thought, I would like to think. But quite apart from that, there was, I understood, a number of presentations, including the presentation of Sir Arthur's works online. But uh, Dr. Nurser is with us this evening, and I'd like us to go over to him and invite him to share with us, Dr. Nurse, what so the school named after Sir Arthur did in his memory 30 years after his passing. And I didn't say his death, but his passing. Dr. Nurse.
Thank you very much, Earl. 1 second, let me change my location so we get better lighting. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm using my phone. My computer is not working so well. It's a pleasure to be here this evening to participate in the, you said the 10th lecture in the series. And so I'm very much looking forward to learning more about Mr. Quinlan and his works and the social movement that he generated. So thanks very much for the plug about the Unthink Thought Festival that we hosted on Tuesday, which was June 15th. It was an all-day affair, a one-day virtual affair, where we had 2 keynote presenters. One was, the opening was done by Dr. Hyginus Leon, who is the 6th president of the Caribbean Development Bank, following in the lines of Lewis, who was the 1st president of the Caribbean Development Bank. At midday, we had a keynote from Dr. Ha-Joon Chang, who is a South Korean economist who's at Cambridge University. He's ranked as one of the top economists in the world. And he's won several prizes, the Leontief Prize, and so on. His works are well known. So he gave a presentation at midday. And we had that interspersed with panels. In fact, during the day, we had 4 panels. The first was on Caribbean futures, where we had a range of scholars, activists, entrepreneurs, who spoke about the challenges facing the Caribbean, not just from COVID-19, but the strategic challenges that we've been faced with for the last few decades. Because the Caribbean has a high level of indebtedness. We have one of the highest rates of debt per capita across the region. In fact, it's in excess of 77% of our GDP. But the region is also suffering from low levels of competitiveness in all our key sectors, and highly vulnerable to disasters and to changes in the global economy, as we've seen with COVID-19. The second panel was on climate change, and there we had participants from India, Arizona State University, and from New York. And that was a very interesting panel because I think we got to see the issues of climate change and the action that is required from multiple angles. The third panel was on the fourth industrial revolution. And there we had panelists from the World Trade Organization in Geneva, from the OECD in Paris, and from JAMPRO in Jamaica. So again, different levels of perspectives on the issue of how countries and our institutions can facilitate the growth of firms, taking advantage of the new technologies. The last panel in the afternoon was focused on creative futures, where we brought together two sets of panelists. The first group of panelists were creative entrepreneurs. We had someone who ran a festival during COVID-19 from Estonia. We had a filmmaker, producer, and film distributor, the largest film distribution company of Caribbean film in the world, presenting, followed by the cultural ambassador from St. Lucia, Mr. Gordon Williams, talking about how he's pivoted during the pandemic. And then the second part of that panel, we brought together two people who are engaged or working with development banks. So we had Dr. Mario Barrow from the Caribbean Development Bank talking about the Creative Industries Innovation Fund. And then we had Mr. Temwe Conway from Afro-Exim Bank. They have offices all over Africa. In fact, they have 5 locations. And he runs and oversees the MSME and economic diversification program there, of which the cultural and creative industries is a major component. So those were the 4 panels during the day. And then we had one panel in the evening focused on youth and social entrepreneurship. We had 2 of our graduates moderating. It was really very much a youth panel, so 2 youth moderators. And 3 of the panelists were former students of the college, one based in Barbados, 2 that are based here in St. Lucia. Mr. Dujon, who's working on Sargassum seaweed. He's been listed in Forbes 30, under 30. So he's doing very well. And Kitlin Kuru, who runs Helen's Daughters and who's just been given an honor, was also part of the panel. So, plus we had one panelist coming in from Colombia. He's engaged with the Ashoka Foundation, and they were keen to come on board with us to talk about their social entrepreneurship model that is being applied all over Latin America. So the panel in the evening was well attended, particularly in St. Lucia, because it was evening time, prime time. We estimate from the data analytics that we receive participants and audiences from 25 different countries, several of which came from Asia and Africa, as well as the Caribbean and North America. So we're very proud of our achievements. And as you put it, the goal was really to elevate and to celebrate the works of Arthur Lewis. He's worked on so many different topics, and we really wanted to give testimony to that, particularly his works on the impact of global economic recessions and depressions. So his work on economic history and as well on the cyclical movements in the global economy is something that we really wanted to give testimony to. And so I think we did a splendid job with that. We're not done yet. We are going to be putting out a call for papers for publication. We are doing an essay competition for young people young university students, lecturers, and so on. We've already received some prizes that we will be able to distribute. And we'll also be doing an animation competition. So please look out for the announcement of these things. So all of this is really to take, Arthur Lewis's works and make them more accessible to younger audiences and more diverse audiences around the world. So thank you very much, Earl, for that opportunity to say something about what the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College was able to put out on Tuesday gone. So back over to you, and thanks again.
Yeah, but before you go, Dr. Nurse, I did take a call or two in between, and there were two things that I wanted to put to you. One, I don't know if you addressed it, the issue of Sir Arthur's works being available online. And secondly, the whole issue of the community college ensuring that the works of Sir Arthur continue to live, whether through it being part of the school curriculum, or, as I understand, the insurance that people the world over can link onto Sir Arthur's works, thanks to SALCC on the 30th anniversary of his passing.
Yes, in fact, we've already built an online portal which gives you access to several of his major works. So that's already available on our website. So that's been a major achievement. We are also doing the same for Derek Walcott. In fact, at the college, we have established a Derek Walcott library, and which houses his private collection. And we are also building out a photographic library, because we've been gifted with his photographs as well. So he will also be enjoying a portal. So both Nobel laureates will have portals, which will give anyone access to their works. Plus, we'll have a physical library for Derek Walcott, which we are just building out right as we speak. So we have about close to 50% of the books already installed. So we are keen to make that happen. You're quite correct. The issue is that we can't just be talking about our Nobel laureates. We actually have to invest so that we reap rewards. So, for example, at the college, we would love to find the resources to offer, for example, some postdocs in both fields, both for Lewis and for Derek Walcott. Because if you look at what's happening in other parts of the world, our Nobel laureates get greater investment from other institutions than from Caribbean institutions. So there's a point at which we must take ownership of our own scholarship. And I would dare say that we haven't been making that kind of investment. So that's what we are aiming to do, to change that dynamic. And so the Unthink Thought Festival is an annual affair from now on in. And the goal is to bring scholars, activists, and entrepreneurs from all around the world to share in the experience and to draw on the lessons that we've been able to glean from Lewis's work. And so you'll be hearing more about this as we proceed. But yes, we do want to encourage a high level investment, and psychic investment in particular, into the works of Lewis. So thanks again for asking the key question. and giving me the platform to say something about it. Thank you much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Keith Nurse, principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. Folks, thanks for joining us. It is 25 minutes to 8, and we are going to take a short break where we are going to bring you up to date with some of the courses advertised by the UWI Open Campus at the regional and international level. And on your screen right now is an advertisement on bringing the classroom wherever you are. And this is UWI Open Campus inviting you to apply today for undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs, and standalone courses. And as indicated, the application period will is from January 25th to July 16th. So we have enough time between now and July 16th for applications for the undergraduate programs, and we have between now and July 11th for the postgraduate programs. And if you have any problems trying to find out, just indicate by getting in touch with www.open.uwi.edu/apply. I repeat, www.open.uwi.edu/apply. Online, on site, and on demand. And our next ad from UWI Open Campus is this one, where you can gain your qualification in sport from home and work. And there is no deadline for this one. You could choose from 3 online programs: a BSc in sports coaching, a BSc in sports leadership and management, or a BSc in sports kinetics. And to learn more, your application should go to www.open.uwi.edu.programs. And you can apply now at apply.open.uwi.edu. It's on your screen. And folks, those are your 2 opportunities, or those were your 2 opportunities to ensure that you could benefit from the tremendous offerings of the UWI Open Campus. Our presentation this evening, like I said earlier, is, as you also know, on John Quinlan and his contribution to the quest for reparations for St. Lucian ex-slaves. And our presenter tonight, Mr. Lawrence Poyot, is a distinguished, long-serving veteran trade unionist in St. Lucia, who has many other disciplines. He's a craftsman, a leather craftsman. He's a researcher. He's a historian. He has done everything I know that any of us would do to keep in touch with finding out who we are and where we have come from. But in his 45, at least 45 years in trade unionism with the National Workers Union, Mr. Lawrence Poyot was primarily responsible for worker education, for taking the education of workers, not from an academic standpoint, but from a standpoint of getting them to understand that the working class struggle is one that preceded us and continues, and to draw attention to the fact that International Workers' Day, the 1st of May, is not just a holiday given to St. Lucia or the Caribbean, but that it emerged from an incident in 1888 when workers striking for an 8-hour working day were slaughtered in the city of Chicago in the United States in 1888. And that is what led to the 1st of May being May Day, International Workers' Day, or whichever of the many days that we choose it to be. But we invited Mr. Poyet to make the presentation tonight, bearing in mind that he is one of those whom we know has made, like I said, tremendous research into finding out so that we could be reminded who were our heroes, what contributions they made before us, and why we should respect and revere the contributions that they made. And John Quinlan, who I could speak a lot about, but not as much as our presenter tonight will tell us. I also want to take the opportunity to point out that this great St. Lucian, who we are speaking of this evening, whose legacy preceded Sir Arthur Lewis and preceded the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, was a St. Lucian whose contributions were significant but have not been recorded because, as you know, our history is accounted according to his story, and that his is not us. And the need to revisit, rewrite, refresh, and re-present our history is one which will never end. And I want to give a special shout out this evening to Mrs. Lena Santoma, who is a great-great-granddaughter of John Quinlan. And she, in the family, is the one who the world, the academic world, contacts and tries to ensure that they could get as much out of her as possible about this great gentleman who is not recorded in the annals of St. Lucian history at our libraries and in the written history that we have written about ourselves, but who, as of tonight, as of previously, but we hope more as a result of tonight, will be somebody who St. Lucians will be more prepared to learn much more about, thanks to what we will be presented this evening with by our keynote presenter, Mr. Lawrence Poyet. And I hand us over to Mr. Poyet.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Your Excellency. Good night to Dr. Lewis and the other persons who are participating. Tonight's presentation on John Edward Quinlan would be done basically in three parts: the period prior to his submission to the Royal Commission, his submission to the Royal Commission, and what happened to him after his submission in terms of the actions that were taken against him by the colonial authorities. John Edward Quinlan was the son of William C. Quinlan and his wife, Mercy Quinlan. His father, William Quinlan, was a notary royal from 1879. William's brother, E. Quinlan, followed his brother's footsteps and became a notary royal in 1893. Incidentally, E. Quinlan was a signatory to the address to Queen Victoria on the 50th anniversary of independence, which called for some form of reparations for the slaves. In fact, the address to Her Most Gracious Majesty the Queen came from the subjects of African descent in St. Lucia on the 50th anniversary of independence. William Quinlan, however, was not a signatory to that document. William was a large landowner in the Fort St-Jacques area, and his background bears some similarity to Henri Poussin, or Henry Poussin, like some people would say, who was the founder of the first political party in St. Lucia in the 1840s, a party called the Social Improvement Association. Poussin's father was a freeman from Trinidad who owned an estate not far from William Quinlan's estate. In fact, those of us who are familiar with the Torai Falls, that was the property owned by that family. William Quinlan held several positions as a prominent citizen of Soufrière. He was the district registrar. He was a member of the Soufrière Town Improvement Committee. He was a member of the road board, whose role was not something that maybe Johnny Quinlan was proud of, bearing in mind the function of the road board and the role that it played, especially ensuring that ordinary Black people provide labor for the maintenance of the roads. He was also the chairman of the Soufrière Library Committee. John E. Quinlan, as you could see, came from a very prominent family, a family of means, a family of educated persons, and a family who played a very important and prominent role in the community of Soufrière. Johnny Quinlan, no? I'm going to put on my camera. Oh. Sorry about that. I was just instructed to put on my camera. Yeah. In addition to his family's wealth, Johnny Quinlan acquired properties in Soufrière and Castries between the years 1882 and 1883. He got married to Rose Richardson in 1890, and interestingly enough, Quinlan's wedding was held in St. Pierre Martinique. And for some of us who would be familiar with St. Pierre Martinique during that period, it was considered to be the Paris of the Caribbean. He was accompanied to the wedding by his father. However, by 1893, his wife had filed for a divorce, which was the subject of litigation up until when he reached England in 1900. As a result of the divorce settlement, Quinlan paid to his wife a total of £750, which at the time would have been a lot of money. As a land surveyor, he was appointed as the commissioned land surveyor for St. Vincent and St. Lucia. And based on my discussions with some of the local land surveyors, especially my good friend Hippolyte and Dunstan, my good friends, sorry, Hippolyte and Dunstan, they said that he was one of the best surveyors during that period, from the point of view that working with plans that he prepared made their work much easier compared to surveys done during the latter period of the 19th century. He was one of the few residents of Castries who was listed as a voter or listed as an elector for the town of Castries, because of the fact that he qualified as an elector since he had an annual income in excess of £60 annually. At the time when the commission was appointed, the islands of the Caribbean were more or less going through the third economic depression, or was feeling the effects, sorry, of the third global economic depression since 1925. You had economic depressions in 1873 to 1879, 1882 to 1886. And the last one, which preceded the West India Royal Commission, was the recession of 1890 to 1896. In terms of the Royal Commission, or prior to the arrival, sorry, of the Royal Commission, the then governor or administrator, sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Dale, was given the responsibility of putting together all the information required for consideration by the commission and to decide on the persons whom he felt were qualified, quote unquote, to make presentations to the commission. One name that was omitted but eventually made a presentation was that of John Edward Quinlan. The persons who were listed as being qualified were more the planters, the colonial officials, and to a lesser extent, a few laborers who were from the other islands. And I will deal with that in a while. Quinlan pointed out that out of the 23 persons who made presentations to the commission, only 5 were St. Lucians. In terms of his actual presentation to the commission, which I believe is the central aspect of tonight's discussion, Quinlan basically made a presentation which had 3 main points, although there were other areas that he covered. The first and the most important was the need for a loan to the colony of £10 million with a grace period of 10 years. This is said would have facilitated the construction of 3 sugar factories in the north of the island. He was of the opinion that by constructing 3 sugar factories in the north of the island, this would enable the peasants to assist in reviving the sugar industry. Because of the fact that, one, the peasants that he referred to, many of whom had gone to Panama and to French Guiana to work in the Panama Canal construction project and the gold fields of Cayenne, repatriated quite a bit of money to St. Lucia. In fact, one of the persons who made a presentation to the commission actually pointed out that there were periods where the gold from Cayenne was valued as high as about £7,000 at the time per month. In fact, he gave one example of a specific month where the amount equal to 7,000 pounds. But what the money was used for is what was even more interesting, and which is what made it possible for Quinlan to place the level of emphasis which he did on the peasantry reviving the sugar industry. And the position was such that lands in the north, which were more or less abandoned by the major plantations, were actually being sold for £1 an acre. So Quinlan felt that with the peasants, they had no encumbrances on their property, so they were more credit worthy than the large plantations, most of whom were bankrupt. They had free labor because they could have worked the sugar plantations using the Kutme system or the Jukuju. For those who don't know what the Kutme system is, it's basically a system where people come together to provide labor to each other. Jukuju is where you have a situation where I would give you a day today, and then you would give me a day tomorrow. So he was of the opinion that the revival of the sugar industry, given the crisis that it went through as a result of the various recessions culminated in the recession that ended in 1896, that was a golden opportunity for the former slaves or the descendants of the former slaves to use some of the money which their parents never received. But rather than asking for the money for nothing, he basically said to them, look, give us the money, we will treat it as a loan, but give us a grace period of 10 years and allow us to use it to see how best we could revive the economy. He also pointed out that in the north of the island, there are certain areas that were not conducive for cane cultivation. And because of the relocation of the British troops from Barbados to St. Lucia at the end of the 19th century, he was proposing that a certain type of grass should be planted in the north to facilitate the rearing of cattle, because what was happening at the time is that the British military, they were importing cattle out of Puerto Rico for the troops. So he felt that, look, there was an opportunity, not only with sugarcane, but even with livestock, in terms of empowering the peasantry economically, because he held the view that the peasants suffered more than the workers or the laborers as a result of the economic crisis, even though the wages of workers dropped by 40% from about 1893 or thereabout. He also made reference to the fact that most of the laborers who were employed, one, because there were some major capital projects being undertaken at the time. One was the expansion of the Castries Harbor to facilitate the coal trade. The second one was all the military barracks and other facilities that were required by the British military for the relocation to St. Lucia. He had a serious problem with the fact that most of the laborers came from the English-speaking islands. And the reason for that, which is the opinion being shared by many, is the fact that most of the laborers in St. Lucia spoke Patois. And then the British employers were not too happy with Patois-speaking people, fearing that there may be a conspiracy, bearing in mind the experiences during the period of the French Revolution, where the British were seriously defeated when they attempted, or after they reinstated slavery, with people like Sir Ralph Abercrombie and others. As a matter of fact, if I may just put in a plug here, there is a monument on the Mon close to Sir Arthur Lewis and to Derek Walcott's grave or graves. And it's to the Enniskillen Regiment. And this regiment actually came here to reinstate slavery. And the monument was placed on the old fort, which was defended by some 2,000 black troops who retreated to the hills, or to the mountains after Ralph Abercrombie and his Enniskillen regiment burned down the tongue of Castries. So that is something that I believe the Reparations Committee need to take note of and to see whether arrangements could be made to put it on the geese boat to sell it back to England. But coming back to Quinlan, what happened is that the laborers who were brought in, for example, some of them were skilled laborers, and George Odlum's grandfather, incidentally, happened to be one of them who came from Antigua. But most of them came from Antigua, Barbados, St. Vincent, Grenada. And because of their presence here, there was a sort of discrimination against St. Lucia workers. Mr. McHugh, who was the founder of the Voice newspaper, who at the time was secretary of the newly formed St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture, in his presentation to the commission, also made reference to the fact that St. Lucian laborers were being discriminated against. Quinlan's plan for the north of the island, a lot of it had to do with the town of Rosalie, from the point of view that he felt that peasant land ownership in the area was significant, and two, based on what I said earlier about the availability of labor and not being encumbered or the lands being free, he felt that it would have been a good place to start his experiment in terms of using the money that was available for reparations. Quinlan also commented and lamented on the education system and the fact that the education system was failing the ex-slaves. He went as far as saying that some of the persons who were appointed as masters or teachers, many of them were not persons who were qualified, all right, to be teachers, thus providing the students with substandard education. However, Quinlan's presentation to the commission did not go down too well with the colonial authorities. As a matter of fact, the then Chief Justice, a guy by the name of Childs, all right, used Quinlan's work, which happened to be the subject of litigation, to write a letter to the administrator to indicate that he was not satisfied with the work that Quinlan did as a surveyor. Now, Quinlan as a surveyor was more or less the preferred surveyor of the colonial government. I mean, to be appointed as, the commissioner or the chief surveyor for St. Vincent and for St. Lucia, that would imply that Quinlan was competent in his work. Most of the appointments were made in keeping with an act on ordinance, known as the Surveys and Boundaries Settlement Ordinance of 1886. Quinlan was appointed to handle a series of cases involving land disputes. And among the land disputes or the boundary disputes, or you could call it land disputes if you please, that he had to deal with were land disputes involving the Bernard family, the family George Bernard, which, for your information, was the grandfather or great-grandfather of Dr. Kenny Anthony, and another gentleman they call Dishalroy, or the family Dishalroy. There was also the dispute between Herrell and Bernard, which is another brother of George Bernard, because they were three brothers who acquired land on the island, one in Denry, one in Aslavidi, and the other one in the Mona Lisa Park Estate area. Excuse me. The cases went before Childs subsequent to Quinlan's presentation to the commission. And Chief Justice Childs took it on his own and wrote to the administrator, informing him in December of 1897. In fact, the letter of the administrator is dated the 9th of December, 1897, informing the administrator, among other things, and I quote, "I have the honor to report that in my judgment, in these actions this year, under the Surveys and Boundaries Ordinance 1886, viz. Prevost versus St. Louis, 20th of April, 1897, Shalroy v. or versus George Bernard, 31st of July, 1897, and the Secretary of War versus September, December 1897, I have found it my duty to comment unfavorably on the way in which Mr. Quinlan, a sworn land surveyor appointed by the government, has conducted the surveys in the different cases." Now, in a situation like that, normally, if there is a dispute involving landowners, the logical thing to do is that it goes through the court process. So if the local Chief Justice ruled in favor of one party, the next step is to go before the Windward Islands Court of Appeal, as it was called at the time. And if you're not successful, to go to the Privy Council. But in this particular instance, the Chief Justice, who had no authority in law or otherwise, all right, to write such a letter, proceeded to do so. And one would assume that it was part and parcel of a campaign by the colonial authorities or by the colonials on the island to get at Quinlan. Because Charles, as an individual, Charles was basically at the center of the social life, all right, of the elite in St. Lucia. For example, he was the president of two all-white clubs, the Castries Club and the St. Lucia CC, which I believe was a cricket club, and vice president of the St. Lucia Racing Club. Now, within the St. Lucia, or the Castries Club, sorry, to be a member of the Castries Club, you had to pay an entrance fee of £2 and an annual fee of £4, which made it impossible for the ordinary people to be part of that particular society or that particular group. So one could never tell whether the attack on Quinlan, came out of or as a result of discussions that were held by members of the Castries Club. I mean, there is no evidence to that effect, but one could speculate given the manner in which the society functioned at the time. But in the case of the Secretary for War, versus September, there is no information on that, but based on information that is available in terms of the war lands at the time, most of it was in the Cicero area, and September could have been an ordinary guy who couldn't afford to appeal. So there is no further report or record on this particular case. However, in the case of Shalroy versus George Bernard, and in the case of Bernard versus Herald, the two cases reached as far as the Privy Council. The issue at hand in the case had more to do with the interpretation of the two sections of the Civil Code that more or less address the issue of prescription in terms of persons occupied land for a reasonable period or persons acquiring land in good faith. But in the judgments that were written, which basically addressed the legal issue, the judges were very kind to Johnny Quinlan. In fact, one of the judges pointed out that the method used by Quinlan to conduct his survey was more scientific in the case of the matter involving Charles Roy and George Bernard, it was more scientific than the previous survey, which gave rise to the dispute. Because in the previous survey, what happened was that the surveyor was dependent on oral history rather than any scientific method of arriving at boundaries. So when Quinlan carried out his survey and he decided where the boundary should be, that was not necessarily the key issue, but it had more to do, for example, with when the lands were acquired. So, for example, in the case of Charles Roy, he acquired the land in 1873. In the case of Kenny's great-grandfather, he acquired the land in March of 1893. So just for purposes of placing that in context, not that I want to defend Dr. Anthony in any way, but what is evident is that the Bernard family who came to St. Lucia and acquired land were never in fact slave masters, but rather persons who came down and took advantage of an opportunity where land was cheap because of the economic crisis and acquired land in free areas. In the case of Harrell and Bernard, that's the Oslavidi case. What was clear, in fact, the judges concluded that given the manner in which land was conveyed, it gave rise to a series of issues. For example, somebody would sell land to you and tell you the boundary is the river, or the next peg for the boundary is a mottle tree higher up, or maybe a mahogany tree lower down. So in such a situation, the accuracy of boundaries became a major issue. And being sympathetic to Quinlan, unlike the Chief Justice, they concluded that the problem was not a problem with Quinlan, but rather it was a problem with the manner in which land was conveyed. Because the cases that were heard in terms of the Windward Islands Court of Appeal, the cases were heard in 1898. And the commission or the letter, from the administrator, from the Chief Justice, to the administrator was actually written in December of 1897. So Quinlan was basically vindicated. Quinlan's response to the Chief Justice's letter was to write to the administrator to request a copy of the letter, since he felt that his reputation was damaged and he was being accused of dishonesty. The administrator responded by saying that the correspondence was privileged, since it was correspondence between the Chief Justice and the administrator. However, he did provide Quinlan with a few lines from the letter. Quinlan, not being satisfied, decided that he's going to take Chief Justice Childs to court for the letter that he wrote. The matter went before the court. Quinlan, who is not a lawyer, represented himself before the court. He lost the case, but before losing the case, he tried a very dynamic, what I would call a very dynamic legal technique. And what he attempted to do is to argue that the acting Chief Justice was not qualified to hear the case because he was the subject of litigation involving an issue in Lindale and Chastney. Then when that did not work, he decided to name every lawyer on the island as a possible arbiter on this particular matter. His intention being to see if he could secure somebody from outside hearing the case, but that was not successful. This resulted in the court ruling, excuse me, the court ruling against Quinlan in his matter with Childs. Quinlan took the matter to the Windward Islands Court of Appeal. They ruled against him, and then he eventually took the matter to the Privy Council. Childs, incidentally, was also involved in his wife's divorce. And he also tied in his wife's divorce with the case against Childs, and that too was he was not successful, when he went before the Windward Islands Court of Appeal. Quinlan, following his defeats in the court, decided that what he would do is to go before the Privy Council to appeal his matter. He left St. Lucia in early 1900 so that he could appear before the Privy Council. Not in person this time, because in both the case before Childs and the case before the Windward Islands Court of Appeal, he appeared on his own. But in the case of the Privy Council, he had legal counsel who represented him. The Privy Council ruled against Quinlan. So he lost the matter from the local courts up until it reached to the Privy Council. What is interesting is that my first reference to Quinlan, or my first knowledge of Quinlan, came out of a book written by Owen Charles Matre, another son of the soil from Soufrière, who wrote the book Henry Sylvester Williams and the Pan-African Movement. And in this book, he says that Quinlan was the first person to arrive in England in 1900 for the Pan-African Congress. However, on examining other factors, it appears that Quinlan went to England for a dual purpose. One, for his legal matters, and two, for his participation in the Pan-African Congress. Quinlan's presentation to the Pan-African Congress basically was a continuation of his presentation to the Royal Commission, from the point of view that he was making a case for reparations for the former slaves of St. Lucia. But interestingly enough, he extended his argument beyond reparations to include repatriation, which was something he never made reference to in 1897 when he addressed the commission. At the Pan-African Congress, which was the founding Congress of the Pan-African Movement, or the founding Pan-African Congress, he was not among the persons who were elected to any office, unlike Henry Sylvester Williams, who was the one who summoned the meeting. Henry Sylvester Williams was actually elected secretary, or the first secretary of the Pan-African Congress. Quinlan, while in England, remained very active in terms of the struggle for Black people. He was involved in a campaign to try to see if he could get the British government to intervene, to discontinue the use of West Africans in South African mines. But that, as we all know, he was not successful. Quinlan was also campaigning in terms of ensuring that the electorate in England elect two persons of color. In fact, he was pressuring the Labour Party to see whether two persons of color could be elected to the British Parliament. In fact, 2 years after, in fact, in 1902, he published a brief book or pamphlet outlining his socialist views. And the title of the pamphlet was The Labour Problem, an Idea of a British Workers' Society, that was published in London in 1902, in which he argued for support for the Labour Party members of Parliament, and that the British workers should return one or two Black colonials as members of the House of Commons. In 1906, Quinlan formed the National Society for the Protection of the Black Races. Now, this basically preceded Marcus Garvey's UNIA. In fact, although it was a short-lived organization, but he did form this organization to see how he could provide some level of protection for what he referred to as the dark races. Subsequent to that, he started a journal called The Telephone, which was the means through which he carried out his campaign in the interests of the DACA races. Quinlan's life in England was not one of a land severe. Quinlan was actually a journalist, and he operated a tobacco shop, a shop where you sell pipe and tobacco and different things. He did visit St. Lucia just before the war, the Second World War, to finalize his will, and he went back to England, but it's alleged, and the research leads to in that particular direction, that he was the victim of a bombing raid during the Blitz while he was a patient at the St. Stephen's Hospital. As a result, his will, which he made prior to his death, he left all of his property to his sisters and the siblings, including a house on Broglie Street where they lived. And he also, in the will, interestingly enough, indicated that the bastard children, or what people would call the legitimate children of his father, should also be beneficiaries of that particular will. So this, in summary, is some of the work that I've done on Quinlan. There is much more, but given the restricted time, I believe I would rest my case here. But before finishing, I would just like to more or less advise Comrade Buski that the next time he's introducing me, he should maybe introduce me as a manager of discontent, bearing in mind that that's what I've been doing for most of my life. And when I say a manager of discontent, what it simply means is that when the employers create problems and they create discontent among the labor force, then people like myself are required to go in there and see how we could manage it. So once again, thank you very much for listening to my boring voice tonight.
And thank you very much, Mr. Poyet. I must say that I never figured you out to be a manager of discontent, but having self-described yourself in that way, I will agree that you have been quite a manager of discontent. From the standpoint that I cannot recall any complaint emerging from your managing of discontent. And I don't know if it's a problem on my computer, but I seem to be looking at myself with Queen Elizabeth in the background. Is that what everybody is seeing, David?
Yeah, that's what we are seeing. And I
Yeah,
believe
okay.
maybe that may be part of your case for reparations.
That was how I was dressed when I received my St. Lucia Medal of Honor in gold for my contribution to journalism in St. Lucia and the Eastern Caribbean in 2016. But that is certainly was not meant to be there. What was meant to be there is the following promo in terms of the importance of St. Lucia. You're paying our attention along with the rest of the Caribbean and along with the rest of the world to the fact that what is happening in St. Vincent continues to happen. But before we go to, in fact, it's here. And what you can see here is the exhibition of the effect of human displacement, the impact of human displacement of the volcano eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. 20,000 people were evacuated. 8,000 have been staying with family and friends. 12,000 evacuated to send to shelters. 5,000 country shelter capacity, and an additional 7,000 sought country shelter. That was what was needed at the time, and we are pleased that St. Lucia was one of the neighboring CARICOM and OECS countries that provided a space for 180 Vincentians who have been here. And we go to the other promo here, it points out that we are stronger together, the OECS and St. Vincent, and that is part of the campaign by the OECS emergency response for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the goal was to raise $100 million in 2 weeks. I'm not sure they raised that much in 2 weeks, but I'm sure that the value of assistance that has been pouring into St. Vincent is within or approaching that region. And of course, all of that assistance being sought is to build back the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and all amounts are accepted. And I did have a discussion with Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, a long one, soon after the eruption, in which he pointed out that it is important to ensure that if you are making any contribution to St. Vincent, that it is going through the correct channels, in the case of St. Lucia, NEMO, and recognize institutional agencies, because folks, like with everywhere, we do have persons taking advantage of the emergency in St. Vincent to falsely raise funds that never get to St. Vincent. The latest we had from NEMO yesterday was that while some Vincentians have been allowed back home, and others have been allowed to visit the areas impacted by the volcano, St. Vincent is still in orange alert, and therefore that means that the volcano can erupt again, and the immediate needs are for beds, cots, the various emergency shelter needs to keep people at least warm at night in this season where we are not normally comfortable at this time. But it is 28 minutes after 8 o'clock. And at this point, we want to invite discussion on the presentation by Mr. Poyet. The only aspect of it that was not addressed, because it was not in keeping with what we were discussing tonight, but in the context of ensuring that we share as much knowledge as we can of John E. Quinlan, I would urge St. Lucians to, in fact, everybody listening everywhere, to Google John E. Quinlan and to discover the wide expanse of his knowledge and his contribution. Because apart from all of what Mr. Poet spoke of tonight, John E. Quinlan was very much involved in the debate on astronomy, in the debate on the geography of the world, and he actually wrote a book entitled The Earth a Plane, to make his contribution in around the 1900s to the discussion on whether the world was flat or round. And that publication is available on the internet. Like I said, Google John E. Quinlan, and those of you who are much better than me will know what colors of lines to strike at and what links to link on to get to it. But all of that to say that Johnny Quinlan was a magnificent contributor to our history. And only today, somebody who called me, my good friend Liz, to point out that John E. Quinlan was the founder of the St. Lucia Workers Credit Union, the credit union arm of the first trade union in St. Lucia, the St. Lucia Workers Union. So all of that continues to help us unfold that untold the story of who John E. Quinlan was and what his contribution to St. Lucia is. And
just a correction there, Earl. I don't believe
yes,
that is
go ahead.
historically accurate, because the St. Lucia Workers Cooperative Union, which was the predecessor of the St. Lucia Workers Union, was actually formed, all right, in the late 1930s, and Quinlan would have been in England at the time. The other point that I wish to make with regards to that is that the Friendly Society movement, which predated both the credit union and the trade union movement, was actually started by the Catholic Church in terms of the St. Isidore Society, sometime in the late 1840s, 1850s, following the outbreak of cholera. The Friendly Society legislation actually came into being in 1916, and the St. Lucia Teachers Union was registered under this ordinance before it was registered as a trade union in the 1930s, thus making it the first organization, all right, of workers, or first workers organization, all right, to register a friendly, to be registered a union, credit union, whatever you want to call it,
we're talking
under this
about
particular ordinance.
friendly societies. Huh? The transition from friendly societies to credit unions,
to trade unions,
to cooperative, to trade unions. So all of that preceded trade unions. So when our grandparents sent us with the little red memo book to go and pay society dues, what was that?
That was a friendly society. Now the friendly societies were basically the predecessors of our social security system, because that is where burial benefits were paid. That is where sickness benefit was paid. So you paid that money into the society, and then the society in turn, upon your death, your relatives would get money to buy a coffin or to make arrangements for the burial. So from the friendly societies, because the Friendly Society Ordinance, I believe, is 1916, from the friendly societies, if you use the Teachers Union as an example, the Teachers Union was registered as a friendly society somewhere around 1919 or thereabout, with a gentleman by the name of Warrington, who was the first president. Then it was re-registered as a trade union under the Trade Union Ordinance of 1933 or 1932 or thereabout, and subsequently re-registered under the more modern trade union laws that came after the Moyne Commission. So Quinlan would not have had a role to play in that aspect, all right, of organization in St. Lucia. Because Quinlan, throughout his period in St. Lucia up until 1900, he was involved with the peasantry. He was championing the cause of of the working people, as I indicated, in terms of the discrimination that St. Lucian workers suffered at the hands of the British. He challenged the system in several different ways, and he took his challenge to the British government, both here and in England, to see how best we could get what was due to us. In fact, what is still due to us in terms of the compensation that we should have received, when the slaves were emancipated.
That is absolutely important to be pursued, because it is important that organizations like the National Archives of St. Lucia and the National Trust pursue the recordings of the presentations made in 1897, for example, to the Royal Commission, the Royal West India Commission, because during the period of service of Dr. Ernest Hilaire as High Commissioner in London, I do know that he requested those proceedings, which are in existence as we speak at the High Commission in London, and could be accessible by High Commissioner Guy Mears. And those proceedings, or the translations of those proceedings, would certainly help in a great way for us to better understand the contribution of John Quinlan. You did point out that it was noted by Henry Williams, that Sylvester Williams, that he was the first to arrive for the West India Commission meeting in London.
He was the first. No, he was the first to arrive for the founding Congress in 1900. The founding Congress of the Pan-African Movement.
Congress.
Good, and that was revealed by Owen Charles Matre from Soufre, who wrote the book Henry Sylvester Williams and the Pan-African Movement.
Anything you could tell us about his presentations there? Because I can recall somebody making the point that since St. Lucia was bilingual in those days, or St. Lucians of his intellect were bilingual, he was able to play a crucial role during the Pan-African Congress meeting in London as a translator in part.
Sorry.
Hello?
Yes, I'm there. I was saying to you that would have been possible from the point of view that you had delegates that came from French speaking countries, all right, as part of or who participated, in the founding Congress of the Pan-African Movement. Some of them would have been students, for example, Christian out of Dominica, all right, who spent the latter part of his life in Ghana, all right, together. Or in fact, he was a very close friend of George François, St. Lucian, who settled in Guyana after the First World War, and Earl Lewis, who is the eldest brother of Sir Arthur Lewis, all right. A Christian attended the Pan-African Congress as a law student. Okay, but there were several persons who participated in the Congress, all right, who were not English speaking, and Quinlan may have played a role in terms of serving as a translator or assisting some persons with translation from English to French. Because given his work, I was saying, given his work as a surveyor, he would have had to deal with a number of French documents in terms of old French deeds of sale. So he would have to be fluent in French. And I mean, for him to select Saint Pierre in Martinique for his wedding, or the place for his wedding, he must have had some sort of knowledge and profound understanding of the French language, because his marriage contract out of Martinique is actually written in French.
Yes, and in fact, to add to that, I did read in a gazette, I can't remember whether it was a St. Lucia Gazette or an English, as in London, Gazette, but recounting his efforts to trace and represent St. Lucians beyond St. Lucia's borders. So he went to Cayenne to represent St. Lucians in Cayenne, and he also went to Panama to represent St. Lucians in Panama. Did any of that come up in your?
Now, in fact, I didn't want to go into every detail, but what Quinlan did, in fact, he did reference it in his presentation to the Royal Commission. Quinlan took his money and sailed down to Cayenne and went to see for himself the conditions under which the St. Lucian workers were working in the jungle, all right, in terms of mining gold. And upon his return, he made a passionate plea to the British government to repatriate the St. Lucians who were seeing misery in the Panama Canal because, I mean, it was rough in terms of diseases and everything else. And he made a similar request for the St. Lucians who were in Cayenne, because he actually describes what it takes for you to get to the area where the gold was being mined and the manner in which the people were being exploited, all right, in terms of sugar and coffee and certain basic requirements that were being sold at exorbitant prices. His argument too was that if the British government had repatriated the St. Lucians who were in Panama and in Cayenne, they would have proven to be some of the best workers on the island, because bearing in mind what they were going through, they would have been happy to come back to St. Lucia and work in a serious manner in terms of making a contribution to the revitalization of the St. Lucian economy. So Quinlan actually went and risked his life, because going to the areas where they were mining golds in Cayenne, if you read his descriptions, all right, and what one had to go through to get from one point to the next, you'd realize that Quinlan put his life at risk in terms of going out there to see what was going on with the St. Lucian people. No British colonial official never did that. So you're correct that Quinlan actually went out there, but he never went to Panama. He went to Cayenne.
And that I wanted to put alongside the fact that, like I said earlier, Sir Arthur put aside his academic responsibilities as a young man at the age of 23 thereabout in London to take 1 year off in 1938 to go through all of the British West Indian territories to document the 1938 struggles. And John Quinlan, in my view, would have done the same before him in terms of going out there to find out what's happening and to make representation. John Quinlan did it insofar as St. Lucians are concerned. Arthur Lewis did it insofar as West Indians are concerned. We also have with us this evening, and as we are running out of time, like I said, we observed the 30th anniversary of Sir Arthur Lewis's passing on the 15th of June, 1991. And we have Dr. Nurse, the principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, with us, and Jim Pullett Louisi, who is not only the chair of the Nobel Laureates Festival Committee, but she was also a principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. And I was wondering whether they would have any views in terms of closing remarks on the presentation tonight and the importance of us doing more than we have just done tonight in terms of discovering, not rediscovering, but discovering those whom have helped make us who we are and get us where we are, but have not always known of. Maybe we could start with Dr. Nurse and then Dame Paulette.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Bousquet. It's a pleasure. I mean, all I would say is that I've learned a lot this evening, and it's good to see both the Pan-Caribbean and Pan-Africanist connections associated with Mr. Quinlan's work. It really gives testimony to the fact that we do need to be documenting this element of our history and our global and regional activism on critical issues. So I really want to compliment the organizers and the presenter for putting on such a good show. So over to you, and thanks again very much for the invitation.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Nurse. Dame Paulette?
Yes, I too would like to commend and congratulate Mr. Poyot for this this history lesson, and I'm sure many St. Lucians perhaps have never even heard the name John Quinlan. I recall the first time his name came up was maybe about 5 years ago when a call came out for nominations, came out from the Office of the Governor General for nominations, the persons to be awarded the Order of National Hero. And that year, the three names were, were submitted. His, Sir John Compton and Sir George Charles. So the regulations allowed for two persons at the institution of the order. So to date, our two national heroes, Sir George Charles, George F.L. Charles, and Sir John Compton. But John Quinlan was one of those names that was submitted. So I'm pleased I didn't know all that about him, and I'm sure now many St. Lucians, would take up that suggestion of looking out there for persons like this as worthy recipients of the Order of National Hero. And I just wanted to add, well, not comment on something Dr. Nurse had mentioned about postdoctoral fellowships to St. Lucians or other persons who would, look more deeply into the works of our two laureates. Now that was a commitment that was made by the government of St. Lucia, the Cabinet of Ministers, when we celebrated the 100th birthday, what would have been the 100th birthday of Sir Arthur Lewis. And that was one of the initiatives that was proposed, and it was accepted by Cabinet. Unfortunately, this never came to fruition. The fellowships, the postdoctoral fellowships, were never awarded. So it would be a good time now to revisit that particular initiative. It would serve us well. And I just want to say that I do remember June the 15th, 30 years ago, the funeral service and the pomp and ceremony of a state funeral when Sir Arthur Lewis was honored in death and laid to rest on the grounds of the college. And for those, I'm sure by now many people know that on his headstone, if you want to put it that way, what was chosen was the fundamental cure for poverty is not money but knowledge. And it is long after that people started talking about the knowledge economy. And so once again, Sir Arthur was very much ahead of his time. And I just want to end by saying that, well, the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee celebrates his birthday, and I'm happy to know that the Southeast Community College will be celebrating and commemorating his passing every year in June. So we'd have a January festival for his birthday and a June festival for his passing, coming in and going out. Thank you. And thank you again, Mr. Poyot, for this enlightening presentation.
And thank you, John Quinlan. One of the things I could also mention as maybe something that the festival committee, Nobel Festivals Committee and Sir Arthur Lewis Community College can consider pursuing is an indication that came up in the presentation during the first Sir Arthur Lewis International Symposium, when a presenter, an Antiguan at Brown's University in the United States, pointed out that a China ambassador to the United Nations had a year or two before made the startling revelation that Deng Xiaoping, the personality who changed China and made it, set the road for it being where it is today, that he confessed that Sir Arthur Lewis' moral and economic theory assisted in helping him, Deng Xiaoping, come up with the formulae that he proposed to take China from what Mao Zedong left it to what it is today. It was also pointed out by that lecturer that in certain rural communities in China at the time, in honor of Sir Arthur Lewis, statues of him, of Sir Arthur Lewis, were erected in parts of China to pay tribute to him as authorized by Deng Xiaoping. And that, I think, would be something worth pursuing it. I've mentioned it to Chinese whom I know, but I also wanted to put it on record that it is something that is already on record and not something said by Earl Busky, but something said by a China ambassador to the United Nations, and it is recorded in the proceedings of the first Sir Arthur Lewis International Symposium held on the 16th of June last year. So we want to thank everybody who contributed to this evening. As always, David Foster and the team at UE Open Campus Technical Section, Kevin George of the UE Open Campus St. Lucia unit, Mrs. Leslie Quinn Mitchell and Sigutani Bryan, also of the St. Lucia UE Open Campus unit, Dame Perlett, whom we've just heard, and Dr. Nurse, who presented earlier, and of course, Mr. Poyot for his illuminating presentation this evening, which fortunately is being or has been recorded and was transmitted across the island by Calabash TV, who we did not acknowledge earlier, but Calabash TV is one of our new stakeholders on the National Reparations Committee, and they have been broadcasting these sessions as of May to TV screens so that it is not only accessible to those on online platforms. A big hooray and a big hug to Bernard Fannis and the team at Calabash TV. And to take us off this evening, we want to leave you with what we in the National Reparations Committee have adopted as St. Lucia's National Reparations Anthem by Herb Black. Good evening, till next week.
Yes, you, in your household, with your family, your loved ones, tucked in for the night, and then it happens. Then they came, the invaders, deceptors, plunderers, traitors, ripped you from one another, man from woman, woman from children. Even babies were severed from their families, dragged into the dead of night, beaten, ambushed, brutalized, chained, and wrenched into dark, cold, musty, holding pens, put on a ship, leaving behind their language, their sold into slavery, values, beliefs, their gods, their culture, sold into slavery.
Reparation. Reparation now. Reparation. Sometimes all I could do is only scratch my head when I get to thinking about slavery dread. All the struggles black man went through is well documented, it's true. Now the Europeans refuse to give to us black people what is due. Rasta always know this is a must, oh yes, cause it was prophesied by Marcus. How much will they compensate? When will blacks repatriate? How long must the black man wait to get reparation now? Tell me, no, I'm not a West Indian, true son of an African, enslaved by Europeans and want reparation now. Reparation. My heart goes out to the Haitians, the Negroes who fought for our liberation. They said Toussaint was a rebel, he was leading the black struggle. So for burning down of plantations, they held Haiti accountable. So Haiti was penalized in court, oh yes. To this day, the country is still bankrupt. How much will they compensate? When will blacks repatriate? How long must the black man wait to get reparation now? Tell me, no, I'm not a West Indian, true son of an African, enslaved by Europeans and wants reparation now, right now. Reparation. Let's look at the beneficiaries of one of the world's most human atrocities. Was started by the Vatican, continued by the Europeans. It was one great triangle shipping slaves out of the motherland. Now they are wealthy because of us. Oh yes, all we gained was the sign of the cross. How much will they compensate? When will blacks repatriate? How long must the black man wait to get reparation now? Tell me, no, I'm not a West Indian, true son of an African, enslaved by Europeans, and what reparation now? Reparation, reparation. Now listen. Now is the time I must emphasize. It's very important black people realize that it is united we stand as we forward on this mission. Our leaders must make sure we get proper representation, and for all the blood, the sweat and tears, oh yes, with one voice, let's demand our shares. How much will they compensate? When will blacks repatriate? How long must the black man wait to get reparation now? Tell me, no, I'm not a West Indian, true son of an African, enslaved by Europeans, and want reparation now. Reparation, reparation. Thank you very much. Good night.